All right, welcome to part 6 of my Death Stranding miniseries commentary. If you are faint of heart, then probably leave for the first couple minutes because this intro sequence is rather disturbing. It'll be over in a couple minutes, but leave now if you know you can't handle rated R levels of violence or horror. Now, this is, I think I already said it was part 6, but this episode I thoroughly enjoy. Really, I like every episode at this point. Um, Episodes 1 and 4 are my least favorites, but I really thoroughly enjoy all the other episodes. I had a lot of fun making them, and they were not nearly as difficult as making episode, 4. 1 wasn't that hard to make, but it was just my first episode, so I wasn't as smooth as I became later in making these episodes and filming them. This episode has one musical montage. It's definitely in my top 3 for favorites. And this episode also has some crazy action in it, and it's definitely got some melancholy stuff in it. And I think it flows really nice. It's got a nice little beginning, middle, and end. So, let's talk about. Let me think. What's on my mind with this episode? Oh, that's right. So, this episode and I think episode 9 are snow episodes. Now, we're definitely in the middle of the game as far as gameplay and story. And I really, really enjoyed the snow when I played the game the first time. I really liked the atmosphere and the graphics. So this was one of those things that I was really looking forward to when I was making the series. When I was making the first 5 episodes, I was like, man, I can't wait to get to the snow. And yeah, it ended up being a lot of fun, and I thoroughly enjoyed making the snow sequence. In this part of the game, your BB unit gets taken away from you, which means that you are now blind to the BTs. So I wanted to make a sequence where it was very difficult and there would be numerous BT encounters, which I did pull off. And I think the cinematography came out nice. I think the editing came out nice. I think the drama came out nice. This is also going to have the World War II sequence in the episode, and the World War II sequence in this episode actually eats up about half of the episode. So, that was also very, very, very tricky to get with no HUD. I keep getting comments about what is the HUD, and I keep trying to explain that the HUD would be the minimap, control tutorials, timers, scores, anything that kind of breaks the fourth wall from keeping this as a movie or TV show counts as HUD. And I have created the only HUDless, Death Stranding series on YouTube. There's still a couple little moments that have HUD peeking in and out, but in general, there's no HUD. This sequence, I had to edit out the title or the chapter screen. Anytime I hear that sound effect that's like boom, I know that I edited out an episode chapter screen. This scene I also cut in half for dialogue, because I'm sure, I don't even remember what the dialogue was, but I just knew it was redundant. Anytime I thought that information was unimportant, I would get rid of it, and anytime that information was going to be repeated earlier or later, I would get rid of it, because I only wanted things to be mentioned once. In this part of the sequence, very early on, the baby is going to be taken away from you, and the reason for that is that the baby is starting to become too much of a real person, and it's starting to become too attached to Sam and too attached to the world of the living, and this baby needs to be right on the edge between the world of the dead and the world of the living. So that's basically what this conversation is about. Now, in a minute and 20 seconds, we're basically going to cut this conversation off in the middle, and they're going to start playing tug of war with the baby, and we're going to kick in another song by Low Roar. In my entire miniseries, I only used Low Roar songs. I didn't use any of the other two bands, because I really felt like Low Roar kind of owned this game as far as their musical, what is the term? Contributions. I felt like there were way more Low Roar songs than the other bands, so much so that I was like, if Low Roar ever watches my miniseries, I think they'll appreciate that it's only their music, because I just felt like, Low Roar is Death Stranding. The trailer from years ago had a Low Roar song, I'll Keep Coming, and I just feel like they did a really good job. They're a really interesting band. They remind me of they kind of remind me of Radiohead, but slightly more emo, which is, I know it's an odd mix, but I thoroughly enjoy them. So yeah, in about 20 seconds, they're gonna start doing a tug of war. This montage sequence is usually the sequence I show my friends when I'm just trying to be like, hey, check out these graphics, because a lot of my friends kind of stopped gaming 5 or 10 years ago. So I tend to like to use just this next 3 to 4 minutes to show how far gaming has come visually. And yeah, it's definitely, everyone I've shown it to has been like, oh my god, like this is beautiful, like mind blowingly beautiful that it's all in engine. And yeah, here we have the low roar song, and we're gonna go into, I don't know, I mean, this is definitely my top three for musical montages. We start with the shower scene. This shower scene is from a Hartman discussion. Now, I cut Hartman completely out, so this footage I could use during the Hartman conversation, where he's talking to you over an intercom. And so because I cut Hartman out, I could basically use this footage and imply that he was sad or lonely or depressed. It also looks like he's crying because he wipes his eyes. Um, and yeah, I thought this montage came out nice. Both my wife and my mother were like, this is pretty sad. Like, this is sad. I also love the next shot where he goes up the elevator and looks down at the baby, because we've been conditioned for him going up the elevator and plugging into the baby. And this shot where he looks down and goes like, oh, what the hell. I think it's a great shot, and it really implies a lot. And here we start having the struggle with, without the baby, I wanted to imply that it's just very difficult now. It's become difficult again, because at the end of episode 3, him and the baby start really working well together, and kind of no more BT attacks. And then now that the baby's gone, I wanted to have it be almost nothing but BT attacks. And I really think these came out nice. Episode 7, which is the next episode, starts off with a BT attack that is insanity and really nicely done. I'm a huge fan of it. But this is kind of a precursor. I love how haunting these visuals are of those guys, like, just clawing at Sam, especially this one. Yeah, I just think that's beautiful looking. There's something very haunting and tragic about those guys trying to claw at him. This shot is fantastic. This is a shot where it could not have come out more perfect, truly. I couldn't have planned it to come out this perfect. It just kind of worked out for me. Yeah. Yeah, and I like that edit. I'm a huge fan of this sequence. It's in my top 3 favorites. I mean, it might be my absolute favorite, honestly. But I just love the struggle. The struggle is real, and I think the snow looks great. And I think I really nailed the cinematography of this. And I just wanted to, the whole point of the sequence was to show the BTs, show what a struggle it was, show that he was lonely in the beginning, and then just showing how far he's traveling and, how alone Sam really is in this world. In the game, you can connect to the chiral network and have other players' gear, ladders, generators help you, but for this whole miniseries, I turned that off because I really wanted Sam to be just by himself, and I didn't want anything to be immersion breaking. This is the whiteout sequence. It's going to get far more intense in the next shot or two. And I thought the graphics in this whiteout sequence are absolutely mind-blowing. And I really like the silhouetted image of Sam, how you really can't see a lot of detail, but the silhouette is just fantastic. This is one of my most favorite shots in the entire series. I used it as a thumbnail for the actual Death Stranding miniseries, and I just feel like it's fantastic. Keep in mind, I'm not like always gushing about my work. Watch episode 4 if you think I just love all my work, because I really don't. I pretty much bag on episode 4 the whole time. But episode 6, I just feel like, man, this came out great. The song came out well, the editing came out well. It's telling a story. The struggle is real, the loneliness is real. And, these mountains are no joke. We're about to get a reverse shot where I zoom in really tight, and it's also one of my favorite shots in the entire series. Not this one. I think it's the one right after this one. Sam's face is going to be on the left of the frame. Yeah, this shot. I love this shot. I mean, this to me looks like a cutscene, but it's live gameplay. And I defy you to find someone else's Death Stranding video that was filmed this well, truly. It's easy to edit the cutscenes together, but it's hard to edit gameplay and have it look decent. And so I really tried to make it look as good as possible. You know, honestly, this is definitely my biggest passion project in my entire YouTube career. Been on YouTube for 8 or 9 years, and I really cared about getting this series right. And I'm so obsessive. I keep thinking about redoing episodes 1 and 4. I'm not going to, but I do think about it. But part of me feels like, just leave it the way it was. So at this point, we're being told that the BB's fine, and could you meet in a cabin that's very close to where we currently are. So after this sequence, Sam's going to take a little hike to a cabin, and we're going to see another storm, and that storm is going to pull us into the next cliff war sequence. So there's 3 total in the game. This will be sequence number 2, and it will be a World War II sequence. And once again, it was definitely super difficult to film that World War II sequence and edit it around the HUD, which I did. So I'm definitely pleased with how this came out. What's interesting to me is that we're going to start moving towards the third act, basically at episode 7. So episode 7 on is going to be the third act, which from an editing perspective was pretty much smooth sailing. Like at this point in the series, I have no more difficulties getting beginning, middles, and ends to all these episodes. I wanted every episode to have a 3-act structure, have something horrifying in it, have something sad and emotional in it, and it was pretty much smooth sailing on that front. So all the difficulties I had for the rest of the series was just deciding what can stay, what can go, plot and dialogue-wise. So I believe a lot of the Hartman stuff would have happened by now. I edited all that stuff out. The stuff with the junk dealer and his lover, that's like the worst acting in the game, I edited that out. We've already moved past the Mama and Latka twin subplot, so if you've played the game and you're watching my series, at this point it becomes very clear what my goal was. The idea of just keeping it very focused on Sam and his direct family members and his direct adventures. So you can see the cabin off in the distance. This sequence might feel slow, but I didn't want to force a musical montage every single time Sam walks, and so if there's ever no music and Sam is walking, just know that the sequence was always going to be about 1 minute, because that was basically all my attention span could handle, and what I thought the audience can handle. Notice that the camera just did a rather smooth, complete 360, which is not something you would do if you were playing the game. It's only something you would do if you're filming the game and trying to make it look nice. Now we enter the cutscene, and I had to make a decision about the very sequence after this cutscene, because the sequence after this cutscene follows Deadman around for a couple minutes, and I really toyed with getting rid of that part, and in hindsight I think I could have. I'm not upset that I didn't, but I kind of preferred the narrative to only follow Sam. I kind of like when things only follow a single character, or a single character perspective, which I feel like the Cliff scenes, Sam is seeing them play out in his mind, so I feel like even though there's scenes about Cliff, I still feel like it's kind of from Sam's perspective. So to me, this is the one scene in the entire series where we're not following Sam, and that's kind of why I considered getting rid of it, but I kept it, because I feel like, well, it's a good looking scene, it's over in a minute anyway. But I did toy with getting rid of this scene. And in hindsight, I don't think it would have been the worst thing to get rid of it, but I also don't think it really hurts anything to get rid of it. At least it sets up that Deadman is going to be hiding in some sort of underground sewer, which is where Sam will be heading, once he enters this cutscene. But yeah, this is supposed to be World War II. The last sequence was World War I. The next Cliff War sequence will be Vietnam. Personally, I think the Vietnam one came out the best, as far as I'm concerned. But that's not to say that these sequences are bad. I was actually really surprised because I hadn't watched the World War I sequence from last episode in months, and I actually thought that came out pretty well. especially when compared to every other Death Stranding World War One sequence. Sometimes when I second guess myself with this series that I'm just gushing over, I then look at anyone else's Death Stranding video series on the same scenes, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they kept load screens in. I can't believe they kept the menus in. HUD everywhere. And then also long and not edited for time. So I do feel like if people aren't into my series, that's fine, but relatively compared to everyone else's Death Stranding series, I honestly feel like it's not comparable. I'm very proud of this work, and it is a passion project. So, believe it or not, those Cupid dolls that look creepy will be explained, I think, around episode 9, and even that will make sense. But yeah, these graphics are fantastic. So, this sequence was also, I want to say, from one of the Death Stranding trailers. Um, in fact, yeah, that's absolutely accurate. This was probably the second trailer for Death Stranding, which came out years ago. And so it was really interesting to play the game years later and actually have the graphics match, actually have the cutscenes pretty much stay the same but be a little different, like Kojima might change the camera angle a little bit. And in many cases, the graphics actually got better, which I can't recall that ever happening. Usually, remember Watch Dogs when Watch Dogs was coming out and they were doing like gameplay footage, and then the real game comes out, it looks like half as bad or half as good. Death Stranding is the only time where it looked equally good, if not better. So I don't know how Kojima does this, man. Like his games have always been the best looking games in my lifetime, every single time, for every single console, for every single generation. He's quite the artist. And yeah, I literally could see like minor peach fuzz underneath his nose, above his upper lip. So it's like that's how good it is. They literally like render in peach fuzz on their skin, which I don't remember any game ever doing that. Truly, it's fantastic. So I believe after this shot, we're going to cut to Sam waking up, and then Sam is going to make his way across the battlefield into the sewers. He's going to grab BB, come out of the sewers, and then get into a gunfight with Cliff and his guys. And it was definitely tricky editing around the HUD for this sequence. But you know what? I'd rather have the problems that I had for these sequences than that boss fight in episode 4. The boss fight in episode 4, the problem was, oh my goodness, this is too short. Whereas for these sequences, it was like, well, these are starting to become too long. So it's much easier to trim something down than try to fill something out, believe it or not. So. And also, in these sequences, I tend to go with a lot of POV to bridge the gaps. Because sometimes I had to cut the shot because of the HUD, and I found that if I couldn't do shot reverse shot to fix that problem, I would just go with POV, which is like first person. And, these sequences weren't too bad to edit, actually. But once again, if you think this is boring or doesn't look that good, I highly recommend you YouTube Death Stranding World War II sequence, watch their version, and then come back to this version, and you'll be like, oh my goodness. Like, how did you do this? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I still question it even to this day, where I'm like, how did I do this? How did I get rid of the HUD? I love that the sound in this sequence is subjective, so if an explosion goes off near Sam's head, it cuts the audio. Slight ringing in the ears. I think that's a nice touch. I like when movies do that. I like when TV shows do that, so. But yeah, really smooth shot, reverse shot. I like these profile shots. Yeah, the graphics are amazing, particle effects are amazing. I love that this dead whale right there and a dead baby whale coming out of it. Really disturbing. At this point, because we're on episode 6, I had tried to pay a lot of attention to camera clipping. So it's very minimal. Camera clipping is whenever the camera goes into an object and the object just kind of disappears. So there was some camera clipping when he walked by that little bush, but in general, I was definitely able to film around it. So for this POV, I was okay with the HUD because I felt like this HUD implies that it's actually Sam's vision and that he has like I don't know some sort of contact lenses that give him this compass. So even though there's HUD for the POV, I feel like that's fine. I felt like it's in universe HUD. In universe HUD is fine. It's when the HUD is talking to you, the player, that I was like that has to go. At least it has to go as much as possible. And in hindsight, I'm shocked at how little, you know, fourth wall breaking HUD there is. Like, it's unbelievably minimal. The fact that I get entire episodes without having fourth wall breaking HUD, I feel like that's practically a miracle. Especially when you play this game and you realize that there's HUD every 60 seconds. But yeah, these POV shots really saved me. They really saved me for navigating this tunnel. The reason why they saved me is that for this sequence, any sequence where the flashlight comes on, I basically couldn't do a reverse shot because if I flip the camera to face Sam's face, the light would flip around to match the camera. So you would basically get a continuity error if you did shot reverse shot for this sequence, and that's why I ended up going, over the shoulder POV, over the shoulder POV, to get around the HUD. This is edited for time. There was a slight conversation before he hands over the baby, but I just felt like, whatever, it's not important plot-wise, so let's just get on with it. So, we got BB back. We lost BB 15 minutes ago, and 15 minutes later we're getting him back. This is probably, once again, 4 hours of gameplay, condensed down to, a half an hour. Of course, it took me longer than 4 hours to film this gameplay, but, you get an idea how efficient my series is. My main competition is, I forget what his channel's called, but he basically called it Death Stranding Game Movie, and I know his video's over 11 hours, and I know that it's not filmed as well, and I know that there's HUD everywhere, and I also know that he has none of the music, because he wanted to make money. That guy wanted to make money. And I just felt like I didn't need to make money. This was a passion project. But to be fair, I want to say almost all of my YouTube is a passion project. That's why I have no format. That's why I do whatever I want. That's also why I completely annoy my subs, because I have 20,000 subs that have all subbed to me for different reasons. And so my average view count is shockingly low, even though I have like a decent sub count, but whatever. It is what it is. What are you going to do about it? If I had listened to my subs from back in the day, I'd be like, I don't know, I'd be strictly doing Bethesda video games. Which in hindsight, could you imagine if you were like a Bethesda channel and you're like, oh, Fallout 76? I'm getting sidetracked. Let's stay on topic. I'm gonna go up that ladder, get into a gunfight. We're gonna see another cliff cutscene. I'm a huge fan of Mads Mikkelsen in general, and I definitely love his work in this game. It's truly fantastic. Once again, back to over the shoulder / POV because we can't do reverse shots until the flashlight goes away. Once the flashlight goes away, I can go back to doing shot reverse shot. So yeah, after this cutscene, I can go back to filming it normal with shot reverse shot to avoid the HUD. During this action scene, we're going to have a time lapse. It's going to be a hard cut time lapse. It's one of those things where if you blink, you'll miss it. But I definitely edited this sequence down for time. Normally during these cliff scenes, I want to say that you down him 3 times and then the cutscene happens, which I might have done for this sequence, but I find that for most of the cliff sequences, I just had him get downed once, maybe twice, and then I would just go to the cutscene and finish it off, because it's a little repetitive and gamey to have him get downed 3 times and then have, the sequence be over. So, depending on how long the sequence is, like, I don't specifically remember how many times I had him get downed in the sequence, but I imagine it was twice. Maybe it's 3 times. I know in the Vietnam sequence I only had him get downed once, because at that point, it would have been the 3rd one of these war sequences. They were going to get kind of too formulaic. And if it's not plot relevant, edit it for time. But I do love that all the episodes from here on out have crazy action sequences and boss fights and whatnot, you know? Also, it's really without these tracer rounds, this would have been impossible. So I'm grateful that there were tracer rounds. Normally, you would have an ammo counter, you would have a reticle for targeting. So it's not the easiest thing to shoot a guy from 20 meters away with no reticle and have it be semi-accurate. So you'll notice that when I do these gunfights, I tend to just fire a couple shots in a burst to be like, okay, it's almost like paintball. If you ever gone paintballing, that's basically how you had to play this if you don't have a reticle or a HUD. Okay, so yeah, he is going to get down 3 times for this, but edited for time. I think here's where we're going to have the time lapse. Yeah, we did. So that's a time lapse shot, which is fine because plot-wise, it doesn't really matter. This sequence probably would have gone on for a good 10 minutes had I not edited it for time. That shot is a little jarring, but I'll forgive it because it was to avoid the HUD. So I'd rather it be jarring for a millisecond than just have HUD and have the entire sequence be jarring. So it's pretty much a miracle that the HUD didn't show up here, because when you take damage, the HUD shows up. So I just kind of know that I was racing to take him out so that it would just say too much blood loss, refilling health. Also, I forgot to mention this, but like, if you notice in that sequence, Sam's backpack became a little transparent, which I was really trying to work around, but there was no way to work around that. Like, once you start firing a gun, the backpack becomes transparent a little bit so that you can see clearly. So I really tried to avoid that, but there kind of wasn't a way to avoid that. But most people don't notice. Yeah, I love these cliff scenes start becoming more and more tragic as we go on. I'm also a huge fan of the way this sequence ends. It's gonna end with him ripping off Cliff's dog tag, and the slow mo. Like, this shot is fantastic. Yeah, that's such a good shot. I love Kojima's cinematography. His cinematography has been on point since 1998. Okay, so that edit from the dog tag to this scene is not mine. That's exactly how the game plays out. And whatever the next scene is, it's also not my decision. It's just basically how the game structured these cutscenes, like bam, bam, bam. So we don't get context for these scenes until episode 10. But in episode 10, we will get full-on context for these scenes, and it is one of the most profound things I've ever seen in any video game or movie or anything. This game really ends very, 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 very well, and I cannot wait to get to episode 10 and talk about it, because I actually am less interested in talking about how I made episode 10, and I'm more interested in talking about what the game is trying to say, the philosophy behind it, the thematic elements behind it. And also, this episode's going to be over in 5 minutes. And episode 7, when I made it, so I made episode 7, and then I watched it, and it stressed me out so hardcore that I'm also looking forward to episode 7. Episode 7 is legitimately stressful. Like, it is such a stressful episode to sit through because, like, the walls are closing in, and the pressure on Sam becomes, like, very hardcore and almost unbearable. And I was really worried about episode 7 after I made it and watched it because I was like, I just made such a difficult, stressful thing to sit through, truly. So I'm also looking forward to that. Which I don't think I'll record the commentary for episode 7 today. At this point, because there's so few episodes left, I'm going to space them out every couple of days. Because I want to clear my mind. But I just know that, yeah, once we enter episode 7, I was really worried about it. I like talked to my wife about it, where I was like, okay, I was trying to make every episode kind of scary and then kind of melancholy, but I really feel like episode 7 is pretty oppressive. But whatever, the game has a happy ending. So in this sequence, we learn about Sam's backstory. We learn about the photograph, we learn about what's happened to him, and basically Sam's backstory is he got his wife pregnant, and his wife was suffering from horrible nightmares because of the Death Stranding. And while Sam was out on delivery, his pregnant wife committed suicide. And and then her body, because it was a suicide, no one was around. Her body had a void out, which is like the nuclear bombs from earlier. And Sam kind of got blamed for it. And on top of that, Sam lost, the love of his life and his unborn child, which made him become unbelievably reclusive. It's where he developed his phobia about touching people and caring about people and loving people. It's why his character is so cold. It's also why he's attached to Lou, because none of the other characters in this story, for the most part, are attached to Lou, the baby, and Sam is. Like the baby would be dead without Sam at this point in the story, and we learn that this backstory explains an unbelievable amount of Sam's character motivations, why Sam is the way he is, why his relationship with the BB matters to him. Because early in this episode, he's like, we're partners. And throughout this series, the BB is treated as a tool and not as a living, breathing human. And Sam is the only character that really treats him like a living, breathing human. This might be the sequence that had the shower in it. There's a really embarrassing scene where Deadman and Sam get in the shower to have a conversation where they're not going to be spied on. I definitely edited that out because the dialogue in that scene was going to get covered later in the story anyway, so it was very easy to cut. Very easy to cut. So we have a minute and a half left of this episode. I personally feel like this episode flew by. I mean, it was over a half an hour long, flew by. It's pretty much over. We're learning more about Cliff, and yeah, I'm super pleased that this episode just hums along, has a beginning, a middle, an end, is interesting, the action's good. We had that musical sequence in the snow that was fantastic. And the very next episode, we are marching into the third act. And the third act is just like this episode, where like every episode is dense and just moves along at a brisk pace. And I feel like it's exciting, it's scary. The next episode is very, yeah. I know I already mentioned this, but I'm like, the next episode is very intense. It has an unbelievably intense intro. Um, it has an unbelievably tense boss fight that's separate from the intro, and then it ends also unbelievably tense and horrifying. So I'm like, the next episode is quite a high pressure situation that's intense. And then episode 8 is kind of the same thing. Episode 9 also this, like, yeah, I mean, these next 4 episodes are just money. Huge fan. We got 15 seconds to go. I thank you if you watched this series. I highly recommend, if you're even remotely interested in Death Stranding, to watch my actual series that doesn't have a commentary, because you'll really get to enjoy the music, the editing, and all that stuff. I'll see you on the next one.